Our top focus story on the broadcast remains the situation in Sri Lanka. Homes of several sitting and former ministers, members of parliament and mayors have been set on fire. Report that's just come in from Sri Lanka indicates that even Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa's home has been set on fire. He had tendered his resignation just this afternoon, but the situation has only worsened, with protesters demanding President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation for the extremely poor handling of the economic crisis in the island nation. Now, violence against protesters has led to considerable alarm, not just in Sri Lanka but also overseas. Sri Lanka is facing its worst economic crisis. Curfew has now been imposed across the island nation and the army has been called out. The images that you see on your television screen are disturbing. Homes of several ministers, both sitting and former, members of parliament, current and past, and mayors in various cities have been set on fire by protesters. Now, a lot of these homes that have been set on fire are of leaders considered very close to Mahinda Rajapaksa. Tear gas shells have had to be fired in Colombo. There are reports 3 people have been killed, including a member of parliament who's reported to have opened fire at protesters when surrounded, and then when he was chased by other protesters, he is reported to have put a gun to his face and pulled the trigger. We are told that more than 150 people have been injured in protests so far. Clashes are escalating. The situation could spiral out of control. The Mahinda Rajapaksa government, of course, he's put in his papers, but those considered close to him are reported to have targeted the protesters, which led to the situation escalating. Now, these are the houses that you're seeing. This image one is of Mahinda Rajapaksa, who tendered his resignation as Prime Minister just this afternoon. This is his house, his ancestral home, we are told, that's been set on fire. Then the house of former Minister Nimal Lanza, his house was set on fire. MP Fernando's house was also set on fire. Arundika Fernando's house was set on fire. Apart from that, the Rajapaksa monument, this was at Hambantota, that was set on fire. Former Minister Lanzo's house, we told you about this. Another foreign minister, Patirane's house was set on fire. The mayor of Bandarawala Vela, his house was set on fire. Another member of parliament, Sanat Nishanta, his house was set on fire. Then Kurunegala mayor's house was also set on fire earlier this afternoon. 8 images on your television screen. Homes of very, very powerful leaders set on fire by protesters in the wake of this huge economic crisis. Shortage of foreign exchange, shortage of food, shortage of fuel. Sri Lanka is facing long power cuts. In some localities, between 12 to 15 hours, there is no electricity. There is a shortage of fuel. And that is why protesters have taken to the streets. In fact, when protesters wanted not just Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, but even President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation, they were targeted. There was violence on the streets. Some protesters considered or seen as close to Mahinda Rajapaksa are alleged to have targeted the other protesters, and this led to a huge escalation in the violence. And my colleague Ashutosh Mishra now joins me for more on the story. Ashutosh, you've been speaking to a number of stakeholders and protesters on the streets of Colombo and across Sri Lanka. What's the latest?
Well, Gaurav, as we speak, the situation in Colombo is really volatile, and it is not only restricted in the capital, but across the island, east, west, north, south. In fact, till tomorrow 7 a.m., the curfew has been under the emergency law has been imposed. The BASL, the observing authority, the monitoring authorities, is appealing everyone to maintain calm and peace. And this has happened despite the resignation from the Prime Minister. And remember, for last 2 months, ever since this economic crisis that hit the island country, there has been demand from all across the corner or political spectrum from the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But for now, what has happened, only the Prime Minister has resigned, Health Minister has resigned, but it all begins with the protest at the Gully Face protest in Colombo, where the Gotabaya supporters suddenly came out in huge number of buses. Now the accusation from the opposition is being made that they were brought in these buses, as suddenly there was clash started when the protesters were demanding resignation from the Prime Minister and President, as suddenly these supporters started sloganing that Gotabaya must not resign, and that led to the massive, the clashes between two supporters. In fact, more than 150 people so far have been reportedly injured, and most of them have been taken to the National Hospital in Colombo. Subsequently, what we're hearing, many ministers, many members of parliament from the ruling dispensation have come under huge attack, and perhaps the country is under siege, where we are seeing all violent clashes, not only between the supporters, but also how the houses, the residential complex, residential premises, vehicles, everything is being set ablaze. So clearly the situation across island is volatile. The army has been called in place, and remember, there have been almost the emergency rule for last 2 months. But suddenly, since this afternoon, this has really turned vulnerable, and it is actually being difficult for the government to handle. And particularly for last 2 days, even the crisis has worsened. As you rightly said, that there is a massive power cut, there is massive crisis of the essential items. Since last 2 days, there have been not even gas supplied properly, and that perhaps the reason why the anger is boiling in Ireland. And the protesters, when came across with this violent clash, the situation has really turned vulnerable. Gaurav.
Keep tracking that story. I will come back to you for more. For the moment, Ashutosh, many thanks.